Sci-fi fans, we are delighted to be speaking again with sci-fi literature author Ms. L. Anna Ellis of the Genesis series. When we first spoke with her at Farpoint 22, there was just one book. Now there are three books. Ms. Ellis, welcome and thank you for taking time to talk with us in the Sci-Fi Diner podcast.
Thank you.
So I know it's been a while since you've been on the show. After the first book in your Panacea series came out at Farpoint back in 2022, when Scott got
Yeah,
to sit down and
Dave,
talk to you.
and Dave, I don't believe it was Anna. I don't believe it was even out yet, right?
It was not out. You got a pre-release version. Hopefully someday it'll be super famous and you'll have one of 15 copies.
Yeah.
Nice.
Is that all that was out of the initial?
It was something like that. I mean, it's been 2 years, but yeah, it's about that many.
Wow. Anyways, Dave, sorry, didn't mean to
No,
interrupt.
you're fine. So for those of us who aren't familiar with this series yet, can you give us a brief introduction, how you got into writing, how you came to writing this story, and maybe a little bit of background about where the setting is, where it all takes place?
Okay, perfect. So I wanted to write since I was a little kid. I remember being 6 years old and telling my sisters I wanted to write a book that I think we were sitting at a table. And for some reason, I said I was going to call it The Butter Knife. And they even wrote down the name and they made fun of me because I spelled the name wrong. So it got off to a rocky start maybe. But then, in high school, I really enjoyed creative writing. And then I didn't do any writing for a long time. And then I think it was 2010, I had this dream. And it was really like about technology. So there was this one, like it was in the future where things are technologically advanced, but there was this isolated, kind of technologically retro society, intentionally retro, similar maybe to the Amish, except that they actually do use technology, but it was like just not advanced technology. So in the book, it translated into they use pre-smartphone technology. So I had this dream and it kind of stuck with me. And for about 6 years, like I tried writing the first chapter, it didn't really work. There was like this time travel component. And then I was talking to my niece and nephew, and I was like telling them about this idea I had that I really wanted to write. It's been 6 years at this point, but it just wasn't coming together. And in having this discussion, I realized if I got rid of the time travel component, that then it worked. And so that's when I really got down to writing the book. And so this idea of this, futuristic advanced society that also has this like technologically, not primitive. It's not the word, because if you're using cell phones, you're not using primitive technology, but maybe primitive compared to what they will be using in the future, and even what we're using today. And so that became the setting for the book. And this the technologically retro area, they have to isolate themselves. Like if you think about the way we use technology today, if you don't want to use a cell phone or you don't want to use email, it's very difficult to exist in our world. It's like, some places you can't you have to download their app, and if you don't have that email to put in their app and the phone to download their app on, like, well, then, too bad for you, kind of. And so to be technologically backwards, they had to isolate themselves. And also that was to avoid temptation, because there's this like constant temptation of like, well, don't you want that smartphone? And then they don't want the kids to be tempted. So then they lied to the kids. And there's these two different areas. And for reasons that I will kind of share with you. Is that a cattail? That's very cute, by the way. So then there's this expedition of people from the more technologically advanced society into this isolated lower tech area. And that's kind of what kicks off the series. And in the technologically advanced area, they progress to the point where they do have embedded chips in their brains. And because of this, they can spend all their time in the metaverse if they want to. So it's expanded greatly. So there are some people that choose to live in matrix-like pods. So the real difference is, the matrix, you don't know you're in there and you didn't choose to be in there. Well, these are people that choose to be in there because they spend all their time online and they know that they're in pods. And technology and like the relationship of technology ends up becoming a theme through all three of the novels. And what I really hoped, I don't necessarily have any hope that this is somehow going to accurately predict the future, because it's set 100 years in the future, it's on Earth. But really my hope was that it would provide a reflection on how we use and relate to technology today, and that very ambivalent kind of push-pull relationship that we have with technology. So it's not like an all technology is bad kind of novel, and it's not like an all technology is good kind of novel. It's like we love it, but we hate it. We use it, but we also like try to get away from it. So it's trying to the various. It doesn't. There's various ways in which it touches on those themes.
Right, right.
Wow.
You mentioned something about the Amish, and I was just wondering, as you looked at like insular communities and isolating these not pre-tech but low-tech,
Low tech is
this
right.
low-tech society
Yeah.
from the world, did you do any? I mean, so we're called like many of us live in our area. We live in the heart of the Amish country here in Lancaster,
Mhm.
Pennsylvania. Did you do any research looking at those types of communities when you were looking at forming your community? I mean,
I didn't. Now that you mention that, that sounds like a great idea.
yeah.
I think the research was
I don't mean to imply you didn't do research, mind you. Just
no, that sounds great. I think more it's kind of like a different way of doing research, but it was like more my own experience about using technology and like making decisions about how much technology do I want in my life. And if the new tech comes out, do I want to embrace that, or do I want to kind of stick with the older way of doing things. It was more maybe a reflection on my own personal life. But next time I get a chance, I will actually go do that research, because it sounds like a great idea.
I was just curious more than anything.
Yeah.
But
Scott's half Amish.
you can tell from my background here,
Yeah,
all
no,
these farm
that's
implements.
great.
Yeah.
And there's one of so in the second book, which has come out since you've talked to me. Oh, I can't see myself. Let me just make sure I am.
Oh yeah, you're holding it up
Showing it.
correctly. Yep.
So this is the second book. This is Panacea Exodus, and the gentleman on the cover does not have a chip, and I don't know if this one has. Didn't get my character art out. It doesn't have it, but I have a picture of him where he's welding, because it's this idea of he's not quite as technologically immersed as some people, so he likes that tactile nature. He likes that this is something physical and solid that he can touch.
Right.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, so you mentioned this character. Miles, do you want to talk a little bit about the characters maybe in the book? Do you want to maybe ask that question and we can edit this?
Sure. So, tell us about the people in this universe.
Okay. So you've got a variety. This is Mariella. She's the main character in the first book. She's the vice president of a virtual reality company. And she gets a new CEO, and he wants to show off how great his digital clone is. So he gives her job to his digital clone. So that's kind of like part of what kicks off the series. And then you've got Cooper. He's the main character in the second book. And as I mentioned before, he doesn't have a chip. And so he approaches the world in a different way. And he also has, about 3 years before the book starts, he lost his job. And when he starts off the book, he's still very bitter about that and still really isolating himself. And then you have Amaya, and she is the main character in the third book. And she also does not have a chip, but yet she is still more technologically minded. And so she likes working with computers, but because she doesn't have an embedded chip, she can't work with a lot of the advanced tech that somebody would use their chip to like be manipulating or working on the tech. So she works on like older computers. She's a person who might go help your grandmother like install Windows 98, something like that. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit. Obviously, it's 100 years in the future, so I assume they're not installing Windows 98. But she's working with older machines. And then there's a host of other characters that there's one guy, he's a survivalist, and he used that there's these games called the Zazora games that are held in virtual reality, where they have like teams competing to complete different quests. And he's a star player in that, and he's a survivalist. And then you have like the reporter, who is a bit of a character himself, and he can also like report on things that are going on elsewhere. I don't have any characters that are in that area. And there are a couple of AI characters which are pretty important. There's a digital clone that takes over the job of the main character in the first book, and then there's also a young we call them ghosts, but they're digital beings. There's a young girl who then plays an important role. She's the daughter of the sister of the main character in the first book, and this sister lives all the time in virtual reality, and she wanted a daughter. And so instead of having a daughter as the traditional way, she has a digital daughter, and who ends up playing a big role throughout all three books as well. And there was something else. Let me see if it comes back to me. It's something I was going to say about the artificial intelligence. It'll come to me later. If I try to think of it, I won't remember.
That's fine. That's fine. So you have all these different characters, and it sounds like there's different levels of tech, and that they're accessible to them. And it makes me think: is there a sense of I know segregation is not the right word, a hierarchy in society where people that are high tech are almost considered to be elite, and low tech people are there's almost a sense of what's the term they use in India for it? But the caste, like a caste system, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, you're certainly considered to be disadvantaged if you don't have an embedded chip. There's jobs that aren't available to you, and it's kind of like somebody trying to navigate our world today with like one of those old mobile car phones versus somebody that has a current modern smartphone. Certainly the person with the brick-like mobile car phone is going to be have fewer opportunities or be at a disadvantage compared to somebody that has the smartphone. So there's certainly different. There's a certain disadvantage, I think, to not having a chip. But then when you go into the low tech world, that's not true, because everything there is low tech, and they don't really interact with the higher tech people. So you don't see that same disadvantage in that area.
So I imagine in your story, then part of the low tech, there's either high tech coming into the low tech world, which puts them at a disadvantage because I'm assuming their tech, they don't have access to everything they would have had in the high tech world. And then low tech people coming into the high tech world are kind of facing that same thing.
I don't have as many low tech people going into the high tech world. There's a little bit of that, but you certainly see the high tech people going into the low tech world, and either they're trying to fit in. So either they're trying to use their high tech but make it look low tech and pretend like it's not high tech, or they're stuck just using like lower tech versions, like, I don't know, walkie talkies, instead of communicating through their chip like they might be able to do out in the rest of the world.
Right. So are they trying to infiltrate the low tech community, or are they sick of the high tech community and saying, heck with this, we're going low tech?
Well, it kind of depends, but for the main plot line, they are actually trying to access a server. It's an old server farm using tech from 80 years before the story starts, like when this low tech area was built. And they can change data in a way from this older server farm that they can't do in the high tech world. So it's really that's why they're just trying to get in, access the server, do what they need to do on the server, and get back out without really drawing attention to themselves.
I was just thinking that as she was talking, I was reminded because my sister worked for the state of Pennsylvania, and she was telling me about how they were having difficulty with some of the back end stuff because the original code was written like so long ago that there are no longer coders who know the code language to update some of the core software that the state of Pennsylvania uses. So like as you're saying that, I was like, that is a real that is a real thing that happens even today. There's tech that is so old that like, you know, a government uses or a system uses because, you know, it's expensive to update and then you have to transfer all of that data. So as you're speaking, that's what I was thinking about. But since Scott spoke to you last, you had one book out and now there's 3 books.
Right.
So how long on average has it taken you to write a whole book? Because we certainly can think of authors, George Martin, who take a very long time to write their book.
So
I'm very salty about it, but
he did. Jen hides her feelings. But.
Yeah. So I didn't want to pull a George Martin. Apologies. Him. So before I published the first book, I had written the second book, a rough draft, and I had written about 2/3 of the third book, and I had a vague idea of how I wanted it to end, but I didn't know quite the details of what that looked like. It actually, I felt confident enough that I could go ahead and publish the first book, but I wanted, first of all, I didn't want to get in a position where people were left not knowing the end of the story. And then also I wanted to like know where I was going. So if I needed to change something or plant some seeds in the first book, I could do that. And then I originally really planned to write all the way through the third book, but I got kind of stuck on the ending, you know, just like what it was going to look like. And so let's say I started 2016 and now it's 2024 and I'm finally publishing the third book. So let's say that's 8 years, so about 2 to 3 years per book. So I'm not one of those prolific, you know, get a book out, you know, a couple books per year.
Not Brandon Sanderson who like, you know, shows up and is like, I wrote 20 books in a month. And you're like, you stop, sir. Seriously. Like
you're making the rest of us look bad.
I am exactly. No, I am not him. Though, you know, in my defense, I do also work in addition. I think he just writes
right.
Anderson to well, actually, I am going to call her out. Melanie Ron, who's taken. She wrote that the second of her trilogy in 1997. I am still waiting, young lady. You know, so like between like I've written for like 500 books in 2 months to like I'm still waiting 30 later.
Yeah. You get a wide variety, and so I'm somewhere, I guess, in between those two. But I definitely wanted to make sure that you would get that third book.
Right.
You know, even if you had to wait a while, you were going to eventually get that third book. So you would get the ending.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Though it did take me a while to really work out the ending. I was stuck on it. Part of the reason, you know, it's been actually it's been 2 years since I published the first book. And you know, pretty much had the next 2 books written, and then I got the second book out at the end of 2022. Sorry, so it's been like another almost year and a half, and part of that was because I was stuck on the ending and really wanted to get it right. And I think in the end I am happy with how it ended up. I feel like the couple people that have read it. Some of them wanted more information. That's the only complaint. They said they wanted more details on what happened with some of the characters in the epilogue, but the epilogue's already like 20 pages. I didn't want it to go on forever. Um,
Don't mess with it. Don't People will say that they want more, and invariably, if you go back and start writing more, you ruin it. Don't touch
Right,
it. It's
right, right.
perfect the way it is. I'm telling you that
Thank
right
you. Thank you for yeah, no, and I think you're right. So I did tell this one friend who really wanted more that I might write a supplement. You know, one of those things you can go to my website or whatever if you just really need to know more about the characters. But I
now.
feel like the
It'll be fine.
Yeah.
the amount that I have in the book right now feels right to me. It feels enough to wrap up the story, but without feeling like it's going on and on and on for forever.
I would have to say having the trilogy, in a sense, mostly finished by the time you put your first book out, had to give a little sense of you hear about writers that will write. I'm thinking of like, Patrick Rothfuss, for example, who, wrote his first two books and his third one has been coming out for years. And that I think sometimes authors get into a space where they have two books out, they're writing the third, and there's an anxiety that they're going to screw it up, or there's anxiety that they're going to
Yeah.
somehow do it wrong. And so I would think having, even though the third book did give you a little bit more of a challenge at the end as to how you were going to wrap it up, having at least the ideas fleshed out, knowing where you were going to take them, had to maybe not make it easier to write, but at least you didn't
It,
have that anxiety stopping you.
Exactly. It definitely reduced my anxiety because, some writers, I'm self-published. That gives me so much more flexibility. So some writers, like they write the first book and they get the contract for the next two books. And you know what? That next book has to come out in 8 months or 10 months or a year or whatever. If you're under contract, regardless of whether you're really actually happy with where it's at. And so for mine, one, I could make sure that I knew in general that it was heading in the direction I wanted, but I could also take that time to really write the third book and take my time on it and get it right. And I think that it reduced my anxiety quite a bit too.
Awesome.
Did anyone's feedback from the first two books affect the writing of the third book? Because like maybe you like read reviews and then you're like, oh, or people like said this is a massive plot hole and I don't like it,
Not really. I'm trying to think if there's anything that I kind of took from the reviews that that made a difference in later books. And well, so actually my sister had one thing she kind of kept complaining about. It wasn't something she would have wanted to change it, and I'm not going to tell you what it is because I don't want to share a spoiler. But I kind of in the epilogue I sort of addressed it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's very vague. I'm sorry, I can't be more specific than that. But yeah, like I did in a way want to address some of her feelings, I
Right.
guess, in regards to that.
Looking ahead, are you going to continue to write in the Genesis series, or do you have some new original stories you want to tell?
I think it'll probably be original stories. Now, well, actually, first of all, it's the Panacea Trilogy. The first book is Panacea Genesis, or I think where you got that from. But so I actually, as I was finishing up the book, there's probably like one of my friends, one of my beta readers is like, I would really enjoy like a prequel, like how, like she wants the story of how this low tech area got formed. So that could be another one. And then there were some other things in the epilogue that I'm like, I left them purposely like a little bit open or vague. So if I want to go back and revisit them at some time, I can. At this point, though, I think I'm leaning towards something else, maybe involving alternate realities, where you have a group of co-workers who get pulled into an alternate universe. There's this, I don't technically even know the name of the theory, but this idea that there's an infinite number of universes. So what was it?
Multiverse, yeah.
Multiverse theory, thank you. So every single possibility that could exist and every single, iteration of our lives that could exist do exist somewhere else. And so in this book, that they get pulled into an alternate reality a different multiverse, and they have to figure out how they ended up there and like how they can get, and it's different enough, they're not, it doesn't feel like home to them. So like how they can get back home into where they came from, and what's going on in that multiverse, because I think there'll be like some sort of criminal activity or something going on, but it's very vague, and other than sort of this setting, I don't have it like really well
Right.
written out.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like the Panacea trilogy, it holds together by itself. It doesn't need, anything else coming after unless you choose on a whim to follow a character down a different line or to tell an origin story in a sense, or a
Yeah,
prequel story. And so, and that's nice that the trilogy itself can hold together. And if we get these things, great. If we don't, it's still together.
and in my ideal world, if I write some of these other tie-in novels, I would try to write them as much as possible to be standalones. So you could just read that novel, hopefully, and enjoy it. Because I do have to say, like, about the third book in the trilogy, if you're like, oh, that one sounds cool, I'm going to skip straight there, you're going to have so many spoilers. It does exist. I mean, it does work on a story basis just by itself, but you're going to have, because the books go like one starts right as the other one is ending pretty much, you're going to have a ton of spoilers from the others. So the idea, if there's some sort of tie-in book, is that I would try to avoid, I don't know how exactly that would work, but well, with the origin story, that would be easy, and try to avoid spoilers from the other stories.
Right.
Yeah, will we see you at any cons coming up?
So I typically go I haven't decided my cons for next year, but like this year I went to MarsCon and the Farpoint convention, and we usually go to Farpoint convention, which is where I met Scott, and AwesomeCon, probably be there next year. But the only one that I definitely have on the plate where I know I will be is WorldCon in Glasgow. So please come join me there. It's in early August. I'd love to see everybody in Scotland.
Oh, we would
wow.
love to come to Scotland.
Yeah,
We're ordering the plane tickets now.
go for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You could sleep on the hotel room floor. Bring your sleeping bag. we'll find a couple feet for you to sleep on.
No, that's awesome. That's
Be a
awesome.
part of it. That'll be fine.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So you have the trilogy completely written. Are we going to see it released as a box set ever?
That makes sense, because it really, I mean, I really tried to make each book be its own story, but definitely to get the full story, you would want to read all three.
Right.
That one, it's really, I think when you read the third one, to me, that you finally get to that sense of closure, maybe. So I think the idea of releasing it a box set could be kind of fun and cool.
Yeah. So maybe down the line. And the artwork is so
Mhm.
so cohesive, like it's so unified between the covers that I think it would also kind of work.
Yeah. I mean, the cover spines are like so nice. Yeah, they look in a box set.
Yeah.
And the artwork was done by Jeff Brown Graphics.
My next
By the way,
question.
just wanna plug him. Yeah, and the character illustrations were done by Heather Friedel too. So
All right,
she
good.
does amazing work too.
Yeah. So obviously, these books are out and available. Is there where would you recommend, or where would you like people to be picking up these books?
Okay, that's a good question. If you want the ebook, you would get that through Amazon. But if you are ordering up either the paperback or the hardcover, I suggest you go to the Fireforged Books website, and then it has a link to our Square site. I actually need to update it so Panacea Omega. Sorry, let me just back up a second. This book, the third book, is coming out on June 1st, this Saturday. And that one, I don't actually have a link from the page for that book to the purchase site yet. So you'd have to go to the first or second book. But then if you purchase it through the Fireforged Books website, you will get a signed copy.
Nice.
And I will also include prints of the color prints of the character art, because the character art in the book is in black and white. So I'll also include color prints of the character art if you go through the website and buy it there. You can buy the print copies off of Amazon, but you get more if you go through the website.
Yeah, so if you go through the site that you're working with, the Fireforge
Yeah.
site, and you'll get a little bit more. But Amazon is also there, and obviously, wherever people choose to purchase it, obviously is good. Obviously for you.
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
Good. Well, it was fantastic chatting with you tonight. Is there anything else that you would like to say that we missed that maybe we didn't hit?
You guys always have great questions. So I really appreciate it. I mean, I could probably talk for hours. But I think you really hit on like a lot of really good questions, and I really appreciate it. So
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight.